Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
Hello and welcome to The Print. A lot has been happening at the line of actual control since early May, when China intruded into the Indian territory at number of places. It all resulted in a clash in the Galwan Valley, the lives of 20 Indian soldiers, along with an unspecified number of Chinese soldiers. China is yet to declare its casualties. A number of talks have been held both at the diplomatic and military level. However, things had come to a standstill. This was until the end of August, when Indian forces outflanked the Chinese attempt to capture more territory in the southern banks of Pangong Tso. So, where is the India China relationship headed? And is there a showdown that is seen in the future? For this, I have with me Lieutenant General P.J.S. Pannu, who has not only commanded a division at the McMahon Line, that is the Northeast, but was also the co-commander of the crucial 14 Corps that looks after the LAC. Welcome to The Print, sir.
Thank you, Philip. Thank you for getting me over onto Print and speak on this most important issue which concerns the entire nation and also the entire world.
Sir, how serious or sensitive is the situation at the LAC?
Philip, the situation is not only serious but also extremely sensitive. Both sides, from China and India, have taken certain military steps in a manner that there is a military confrontation which is not only brewing up, but has also resulted into eyeball to eyeball contact and then clash. This does not only concern India and China, but also Tibetans as people and also the entire world, because these are two nuclear armed nations. And both coming to this kind of a military sensitivity and military confrontation, which is looking very probable to me, is a very delicate situation, extremely sensitive, and needs a larger understanding by populations of two countries and also of the entire world.
So, are you suggesting that a clash is a very high possibility?
Yes, it's a very high possibility. Two militaries now fully armed, without any protocols to stop them. All the protocols which were there have been thrown out of the window. So therefore, the militaries are now free to do what they want to do to defend their own interests.
So if we go back to what has happened at the LAC, initially the Indians were taken in by surprise with the Chinese move in Galwan Valley, at the Gogra, the hot springs, as well as the finger area of Pangong Tso. However, things seems to have changed towards the end of August. So, while we have reported on this, I have written articles on this and stories on this. So, tell us what exactly happened on the intervening night of 29th August and 30th August, as well as on 31st August. What changed?
Philip, north of Pangong Tso, PLA troops had taken initiative. While the Indian army continued to follow protocols because they were quite used to the Chinese intruding into certain areas which they call it their claim line. These were all always sorted out into protocols of face-off and banner drills. This time when it happened, Indian army continued to go by those protocols and practices, being very law-abiding, peaceful, democratic country. Having this time got surprised that the Chinese came in with much larger strength and did not honor the co-commanders' talks, did not honor any protocol, and they were on a land grab. And the Indian army only realized that this time, even though there have been 5 co-commanders' talks, they have only been talking, but nothing in spirit and nothing in action that they did to disengage from the northern banks. Similarly, waiting for about a couple of weeks or maybe a month and a half, the Indian army realized that this is not what is going to be achieved through talks, and the PLA would continue to be belligerent, and they would land up occupying even more territory. That was not only the intelligence, but also a great assessment. And with certain movements which they noticed in south of Pegongso, the area which was relatively quiet until June and July, suddenly the indications came that they may even go for a grab of this territory. So a preemption was made by the Indian troops, and they have occupied the most important and significant and dominating heights in the area which is south of Pegongso, around the Spangur Gap, which is built along the Spangur Lake or Spangur So, leaving Indians at a much more advantageous position between north and south. All told together, India is in a much dominating and a much better position today, if it is spoken in the realm of bargaining, but also to be seen that should push come to shove or military confrontation takes place, India would be at a much better position.
So you're saying if push comes to shove, India would be at a much better position than it was in the beginning when this whole crisis really began?
Yes, there is a paradigm shift.
So, you are someone who served in this area, you've studied China very well, you know the entire terrain. So one of the big confusion when it comes to this particular is a feature called blacktop. Now, initially, there was information which came in that, blacktop was captured. This was source-based information, which was, a lot of speculation that happened. And later it has now come to know that the blacktop is actually not on the Indian territory. It is on the Chinese side of the LAC. So if you could give us a clarification to the viewers exactly about the status of blacktop, sir.
Philip, firstly, in my article sometime back, I think at the beginning of the confrontation, I wrote an article defending the undefined.
Yeah.
When you cannot define a boundary, which was supposed to be defined over a period of time, for which 22 boundary negotiations have happened, and they have not been able to decide on the boundary.
Yeah.
So if the boundary has not been decided, to start talking about Indian side or Chinese side is left to a matter of perception.
Okay.
Second thing is, when the military goes in for operations, the military commanders do not look at these lines then. They look at from where they will have a better tactical advantage.
Yeah.
As a result, what you saw in Kargil was a protocol that there was a precedent that the line of control was defined because it was signed and it was agreed, which India did not want to change. And therefore, they, again, being a law-abiding country, did not want to change that and took the entire disadvantage in tactical terms and yet cleared all those areas with much more greater difficulty than if they had crossed the line of control. In this particular case also, I think Indians have been trying the same thing to try and stay on certain areas which are not considered as to create a problem of understanding. But for tactical operations, you go into certain areas where you should have a relative advantage of heights. You should be able to capture those areas or dominate those areas from where you will be in a better position. So I will not really go into a debate of whose land it was because it is not settled. If you go back into the history, we have drawn an international border in 1954, in which the whole Exai is part of Indian territory. Now, the next was the line of actual control. We fought a war in 1962. Again, the Chinese went back 20 kilometers. We also fell back at the same time. 22 boundary negotiations have not been able to settle. So I don't think so we should talk about by inches and by these heights. We have to talk about the area where the Indian troops have to now remain in dominating heights so that their interests are preserved. They will not be able to do justice to a defensive line if they are only occupying certain heights which are relatively at a disadvantageous position. Seeing purely from the technical terms, I would not like to get into that argument of whose territory it was. Like on the line of control, there is something called grabber holder. Somebody who grabs, the line belongs to you. Both militaries are now in the same eyeball to eyeball military confrontation. Even though the troops would have gone into certain areas, both sides have got the militaries perched on these dominating heights. There is always an activity called improvement of defensive posture. And if you remember some time back, they were talking about that the Chinese patrol having come in and fired a few shots in the air. That is trying to improve the defensive posture. When this kind of a jostling happens on ground, you continue to improve your defensive posture till the time you sit down and talk about it. There is no scope of discussion and no scope of talk, because the co-commanders, when they were offered last week to come and talk, they refused to talk. And if you refuse to talk, I think the military young commanders would decide how they would want to defend the piece of land which they have to defend.
Absolutely, and there is no doubt about it, sir. So, India has now captured these heights, so dominating positions. So now, do we say that India is now up the game?
I would not really use the word capture. I think they have only gone and occupied these heights, which were unoccupied. I would say that they occupied ahead of time before the PLA could occupy. If the Indians had not occupied, same as in the case of Siachen Glacier in 1984, the Indians actually went and occupied the Soltoro Ridge, denying the ability to the Pakistan army to come and sit on the same ridge line. So I think it is a preemptive action in which these heights have been occupied, not captured. I would use the word captured if they were already been occupied with the PLA and a battle was fought there and they were dislodged from that position and we would have captured it from the PLA. It is not a matter of capture, it is a matter of occupying.
Well, you've got me there. It's absolutely right. Indian troops have gone ahead and now occupied these dominating heights at the southern bank. We've also climbed up, near the finger area, and we are now sitting at a more advantageous position than the Chinese were at the, finger four ridge lines there. So do you feel that India has upped the game, the Indian army has upped the game from what it was initially?
Philip, I think the game is still in the play. You cannot draw a line on the score when the game is still in the play. But I would say currently in the running score, India is in a much better position, whether you talk about north of Pegongso or south of Pegongso. In the area north of Pegongso, in the finger area, I think it is not that kind of an advantage and cannot be compared with south of Pegongso, which is a clear advantage. As far as north of Pegongso is concerned, they have improved their defensive posture. They are in a much better position than they were earlier. So it is quite relative in a manner of speaking.
So, so do you think somewhere, it is felt that China was not expecting the Indian army to do what it did towards the end of August, which has now, as you say, in the running score, India is ahead. So is it something that has taken China by surprise? Do you feel that did China anticipate this?
I think Chinese always felt, and I think they've sold it to themselves, psyched themselves also, that Indians would be weak and they can be pushed around. Now they have realized that India is not a pushover. They should have made these calculations earlier before they started the operations in the month of May itself. They should have known that India is not a pushover, but I think they are still living with that 1962 syndrome. Surprisingly, in many of our border meetings, the script given to the PLA officers was that, haven't you forgotten 62? And this time it will be even worse. So they came with that script. That script means that they have been psyched and primed that, look, India is a pushover and you must keep scaring India of 1962 defeat and keep reminding them of it. And the PLA officers have been reminding us of it during border negotiations. So knowing what they believe in, what they have been saying, and what they have done on ground, certainly they are surprised, and they did not, I suppose, expect this kind of a reaction from the Indian army.
So, interesting that, you mentioned the fact that the Chinese keep talking about 1962. I think Ladakh, whatever happened in 1962, in the Northeast, there is no doubt about the fact that China literally had a walkover. But in this particular sector, the Ladakh sector, the Indian army, the Indian forces really put up a tough fight. Isn't it so, sir?
The answer is yes and no. And there are a couple of reasons for that. If you talk about at that time called NEFA,
Yeah.
uh, the Indian army did not build any infrastructure in that area. Many troops were hurriedly put there, and they went and occupied certain areas, certain heights, and certain areas which are not very dominating. The troops were thin on ground, they were not prepared for winters. Even the command and control was also not there to motivate them and give them directions. When the Chinese attacked, they got an advantage of terrain that they went into certain areas which were completely unoccupied, and the PLA could push themselves through the valleys, and they captured certain areas and came to the rear, completely paralyzing the forces which were thinly perched along the watershed. As a result, when the orders were not forthcoming, the Indian army actually did not put up a fight, except at few places like Tongpinla, where Subedar Joginder Singh got his Paramveer Chakra.
Yeah.
He refused to budge. He said, I will die here in defense of Tawang. But it is only after Subedar Joginder Singh and his platoon of 1st Sikh was completely decimated. Only then could the Chinese make an advance towards Tawang, and they built the road right up to Tawang, and came to a place which they made into a China ground. Similarly, they went behind Tawang and came down to a place called Jung, and they continued to encircle the troops. Came very close after capturing of Bombdilla, very close to the plains of Assam. Then they realized that the winters are setting in. Their lines of communication are getting extended. In the northeastern region, their lines of communication were as far back as 1,800 kilometers. It was hostile territory, terrain-wise and also population-wise. The Tibetans were still hostile to them, and hostile to them in a manner that they could not trust a single Tibetan. As a result, they would have realized that they have overextended themselves and they cannot hold on to this territory, and they went away. As far as Ladakh is concerned, in Ladakh, they did not find those kind of valleys, and they felt it was important to attack the Indian troops head on. Now, when you attack the Indian troops head on, a Battle of Razangla then reminds that the entire company was written off. Every man fought. Taking the example of Razangla, now you say there are Razanglas now everywhere at every mountaintop, not only in Ladakh, but also along the entire region of Arunachal Pradesh. How many Razanglas would they fight? And those Razanglas are not going to be where they can kill Indian troops. I suppose we are trained in high altitude warfare. We are equipped. We have experience. Not a single day the Indian army soldier is not blooded. We have been fighting ever since we became independent. And now that they are faced with an experienced army, motivated army, who has knowledge of every inch of ground, and every inch of ground can be occupied, I think they are going to get into a very serious situation in super high altitude area where the troops are not acclimatized. The troops have never operated in such environment. They are not blooded. They have no war experience. They are completely relying on political motivation and high technology. I think that is a mix which still needs to be fixed within their own areas of cohesion. Whereas Indian Army has got very, very clear political, very, very clear military objectives to defend certain lines. We are not a nation which occupies others' territories. We are not expansionists. We are peace-living country. So in the peace-loving country, you only have a major security objective is to defend your international border and not go and grab hold of territory which is legitimately not yours. But even if you go into history, I suppose some amount of territory, if India captures, would still we'll be able to justify. But China will not be able to justify even an inch of ground if they attempt to capture.
So, sir, in a way, with India's reaction, China not expecting this reaction from India, has in a way China caught, itself in its own game, sir.
Yes, Philip. When you look at the game, it is a chessboard initially.
Hmm.
The game of chess has been played here for very long. Earlier, you called it great game. In the great game, the chess players were different, and the players continued to change. The British were there, and the other silent player was Russia. Whatever pawns they were placing on the ground, marking lines here and there, was basically to deal with Russia and keep Russia at bay. They also used China uh, to become a buffer between the British interests and the Russian interests. Uh, and because the Chinese came in as buffer, they started building their own constituency around their own history and claims. And that is how they entered this area. Then the chess players changed. India became independent. Russians were not there. The Chinese also, the Communist Party came up and they came into Tibet with their historical claims. And they wanted to go to Xinjiang. They made a road while we built our own maps giving the international border the way it is, with 38,000 square kilometers, which now we told, as we consider as Exai Chin, being held by the Chinese illegitimately. So therefore, history is how far back you go on it. If you continue to go back, you will find that the chess players have changed over a period of time. And if you come in the very recent history, obviously you're talking about 1962 war and the line of actual control and the McMahon line, and again 1962, what came there. So as a result, what is being claimed and what is being defended is something that needs to be seen in a perspective, needs to be seen in a context. But now that this has happened, that the Chinese are there, the PLA is trying to push around, the Indians are defending the territory, the strategy and the tactical operations both put together has brought the situation to where it is. The question now to both India and China is, what is the exit strategy? You don't start anything without an exit strategy.
Exactly.
And if China has started something without an exit strategy, literally speaking, now they have to innovate one. One would be very curious. I think the whole world would be very curious to know what is the exit strategy of Xi Jinping.
That's very true. And this is what my next question was. So where do you see this headed? China had, in my own thought process, I'm not thinking that China really took into account the India's response. China was really, trying to be the bully as it has always been. It was trying to put India on the back foot. But now that India has taken these steps and have now stood up to the bully, so what do you think is the end game as far as India and China are concerned in this particular, region?
Philip, as we spoke about, the ball is clearly in the Chinese court. Both countries have been speaking a language on the political, diplomatic, and on the military tables, and the outcome is what is known to everyone. I think that signaling did not actually made a good conversation between the two countries. And sometimes, I really wonder, why do we say Chinese whispers? Chinese whispers really mean that you do not make a very clear, the lines of communication are very clear. The transmission losses are there in communication. As a result, what has happened is that both countries have two big issues that you can look at from where they come from. One is obsession of both, that we will do what we think is right. And second is suspicion. Do not grant it to the other fellow. India has a claim on certain territories, but according to the PLA and the CPC, those claims are no claims. The claims are only of the CPC. The claims are only of Xi Jinping. The claims are only of China. So therefore, if both are obsessed with their own claims and they do not make good strategic communication, the only communication and signaling that they have done is through marching of troops towards each other. As a result, it is now whoever picks up a phone or whoever shows the willingness to talk really would be seen as a weaker side. This is a serious situation. But when I say that the ball is clearly in the court of China, I would mean that they are the ones who initiated the aggression, and therefore it is their court. And second is that now Indians are occupying certain territory, which is making Chinese absolutely uncomfortable, and they're surprised about it. Still, the Chinese have to now play the ball. As a result, in the exit strategy, I would seriously feel that it would be China who should take an initiative and maybe pick up a phone or maybe initiate a dialogue. But what happens is that in this kind of obsession with their own selves, the defense ministers' talk, it did not yield anything. And the foreign minister's talk also was repetitive of what the defense minister spoke, clearly blaming India for the consequences in this kind of a confrontation. As a result, if both do not back off, either you are headed towards a standoff, which is going to be a longish standoff, or you're going to land up fighting a war. But that would go contrary to the Chinese strategy of winning a war without fighting it. If they have to fight a war, then they are running contrary to their own strategy of winning a war without fighting. I suppose Chinese would be doing something else. At the moment when the military activities are not being reported, they would be looking at taking the whole nation differently. They would be quietly talking to either Pakistan or doing something in the South China Sea, maybe pushing the submarines and placing them and shaping the battle in the oceans, maybe waiting and watch as to how the Quad shapes up. They could also be biding time, waiting for the elections in US to get over, or maybe if there is a general confusion in the world in the wake of the American elections, maybe that could be another point where they would take off, play the ball not for exit, but play a ball to push. If that happens, then clearly we are headed towards a larger confrontation. But where this confrontation is going to end, with two powers being nuclear armed, with Pakistan also as our permanent adversary, completely in cahoots with Chinese, would be just waiting for orders. Chinese, I think, are struggling now. Initially, I thought Chinese would not take Pakistan's help. I think now, because they are looking weak, they are seriously going to be looking for Pakistan's help to do something about what the Indians have done to them. I think Indians need to watch on both fronts.
Okay. So you're saying that Chinese are struggling now, and hence they could now tie up with Pakistan to put in more pressure against India. So, we've spoken about what is the future, what is happening at the LAC. One, and this would be my last question to you, and this is something that I've always, asked people, multiple people that I speak to on record, off record, is why do you think China did what it has done now?
Philip, actually, I cannot speak for the Chinese because, when you speak about the Chinese whispers, you could be hearing something different, and it could mean something totally different. So if we place ourselves in the Chinese shoes, they're calling themselves as the Middle Kingdom.
Yeah.
They were building roads, Belt and Road Initiative to capture territories through trade initially.
Yeah.
To invade nations by giving them loans, bringing them under debt, and making them play a game which was to be set by the Chinese. As a result, COVID actually upset this whole game plan of theirs. If COVID is something which they thought was a good strategy, and they thought the whole world is now crumbling under the pressure of COVID, they, with the aspiration of becoming a number one power in the world, they may have made a miscalculation. The advisors in the communist regime of Xi Jinping may have actually told him that, look, why wait for 2049? You can become a superpower today, because the whole world is already, suffering heavily under the weight of COVID. Now is the time actually you can push around. So therefore, they did what they did militarily in South China Sea towards Taiwan. Their actions and reactions to the actions of the Quad countries that they want to actually prove to the whole world that they have arrived, I think they arose prematurely. They could have waited a little longer, but I think Xi Jinping became impatient. They were pushing around, and maybe they are not tolerant to anything which is said which undermines the stature of Chinese and the Communist Party of China. China is nothing but actually it is a party. Sometimes I don't know whether to call it China or call it a Communist Party, because the whole nation is actually owned by a party. So it is the Chinese party, Communist Party, which runs its agenda. They don't ask the people. They use the word people very illegitimately. People's army and whatever people's, everything is people's revolution. But I think that is to fox their own people, confuse their own people that we are for you. Actually, they are not for anybody. They are for their own political power interests. So as a result, they have made a calculation to make Xi Jinping the leader in the world, who's obsessed by himself and his own power, and build a perception now that China has arrived. For me, I think it is premature. This is something which they have miscalculated. They clearly need to work on an exit strategy. And I would hope a better sense prevails in them that they can actually come out with a very practical exit strategy. How they will mend this, I think it is up to Xi Jinping and his own political advisors to get practical now. I wish them all the best, but I don't see any sense because Chinese have been making mistakes after mistakes, and my reality or realism would say they just might continue to make mistakes, and India has to be aware, and I think whole world needs to be aware of the Chinese, how they are going to really continue to make these mistakes and push around in the world. Whole world need to rally around, make whatever alignments they want to do, catch this bully from all sides, and do not allow it to destroy the world.
And you are absolutely right in calling China a bully, and the fact that it seems that China has completely miscalculated this. It never expected the Indians to stand up, and that they have done. So the ball definitely is in China's court. And as you said, it is hoped that Xi Jinping and his advisors come out with a very practical, clean exit strategy, because at the end of the day, war doesn't help anyone, especially in these modern times. And India is not interested in a war, but as you said, if push comes to shove, the Indian soldiers will definitely fight it out and ensure that India succeeds.
Without any doubt, Indian troops will do exceedingly well.
Thank you so much, General Pannu, for talking to The Print. It was a pleasure talking to you as always, sir.
Thank you, Philip. Wish you all the best, and thank you, Jai Hind.
Thank you, sir.